Storms in the north.
This is AM Agenda.
Hello and welcome to the program. After the Labor nightmare of the last week, bad polling doesn't come as much of a surprise, but the JWS Research Survey on the front page of today's Financial Review makes for awful reading for Labor MPs. Not only does it show that they'd lose every one of their marginal seats, but there's also a counterintuitive finding which says that most voters in those marginal seats would actually prefer a Labor win but can't stomach voting for the ALP. Joining me to discuss this and the other matters of the day, the Assistant Treasurer David Bradbury and Liberal frontbencher, the Shadow Minister for Families, I should say, the Shadow Minister for Families, Kevin Andrews. Gentlemen, good to see you both. David Bradbury, on this list of marginal seat MPs to go, you're right at the top. This JWS research must be, well, just add to the already awful morale within Labor ranks.
Look, Kieran, I'm sure you'll have a lot to say about the polls. I don't intend to comment on them further, frankly. You know, we're getting on with the job of trying to govern for the country. If you want to ask me about our record of job creation, more than 900,000 jobs created, our record of growing our economy at a rate of where it's now 13% larger than it was before the GFC. You want to ask me about the things that we're doing to support families, the school kids bonus, the things we're doing for the future, rolling out the NBN, preparing for the Asian century. I'll talk about those things.
I'll ask you about superannuation a bit later, but on this issue of people preferring a Labor win but not being able to stomach voting for the ALP, what do you put that down to?
Well, look, in the end, all elections are about a choice, and there will be a very clear choice that people will have come September, a choice between whether or not we get on with the job of building the big platform for our future, whether it be things like pricing carbon, whether it be investing in education, whether it be about making sure we roll out the NBN so that everyone has access to high-speed broadband. We're doing these things. Mr Abbott, on the other hand, he wants to rip away those things, and he wants to put his hand in people's pockets and rip away the assistance that comes with things like the carbon price. Yeah, people are beginning to understand, and I'm starting to get phone calls into my electorate office and people are raising it with me in the community, particularly from pensioners. Pensioners that fear the fact that Abbott will rip money away from them. He's been telling people for 2 years now, if you don't have the tax, you don't need the compensation.
Okay, but
he will rip away the carbon
issue,
price and he will take money out of people's pockets.
Let's go to Kevin Andrews. Are you surprised that a majority of the voters surveyed in this poll would actually prefer a Labor win? That does seem, as I said at the start of the program, counterintuitive given their voting intention is otherwise, would suggest otherwise.
As I travel around Australia, what I find is that people are simply saying they are fed up with, they're sick and tired of a Labor government which is essentially at war with itself. What they're looking for is a strong, stable government that's going to give certainty and security for the future, and they just find that Labor is fighting an internal civil war. They want a plan for the future, they want a plan like we've got for the future about a strong Australia, but they're not getting that from a Labor government.
When you look at these numbers, Kevin Andrews, you've been around politics for a long time. Is this a case, if this is a case where voters have stopped listening to the Prime Minister, really this looks like the unlosable election, doesn't it, for your side?
Well, no election is over until the last votes are counted. We all know that, and things can change. There's still, 169 days to go to the election. I think people are going to struggle with that period of time because it's been such a long election campaign. But the reality is that we will provide Australians with a plan for the future. We will say to them, this is the way in which we can take the country forward, and instead of concentrating on the internal warfare within our own party, which doesn't exist, we're united and disciplined, we will get on and do that, and that'll be a stark contrast to what Labor is providing.
David Bradbury, are you worried that what you're seeing here, though, is a reaction post the announcement of the election date, that voters might have been wavering prior to that, but now they've locked it in? Certainly all of the surveys that we've seen subsequent to that announcement have been all in the one direction. Do you have any hope at all of, for example, holding on to your marginal seat of Lindsay? Most observers say you don't.
Well, look, Kieran, I'll let observers make their own judgments. In the end, it's the people in electorates like mine and electorates all around the country that will form judgment on that in September. But I make this point that you alluded to the fact that people have grave concerns about a change of government, and I see Mr Andrews there holding up this little booklet. Now, I want to make this point that no amount of glossy booklets makes up for an absence of clearly articulated and costed policies. Now, I have never seen anything so ludicrous as Mr Abbott fronting up in front of the camera every second day, holding this silly little booklet in front of him. It's about time someone actually read the booklet. And if you actually look at the booklet, there are no plans, there are no costed policies, and the only things they've gone on the record indicate that they're going to rip money away from people.
Well, they do have unity. They do have unity and discipline, something that's eluded your side. How does the Prime Minister even... she's calling, you know, saying that this is a line under this debacle of last week and so on, but how do you retain discipline with numbers that suggest you're all heading off a cliff?
Well, we're getting on with the job of governing. Now, we're preparing a budget which is going to be a significant statement in terms of where the government is heading moving forward. Obviously, we've got a big job ahead of us. That's something that we're very much focused on, and that is going to be an important part of the platform that we take to the next election.
Even on the budget, you've got problems because you've got Joel Fitzgibbon, now Kim Carr, expressing concern about this, the plan that hasn't been repudiated by senior figures. In fact, the Prime Minister indicating yesterday that sustainability is something that the government needs to achieve on superannuation. It looks like you're going to raid people's super.
Kieran, give the Australian people a little bit more intelligence. Don't insult their intelligence by remouthing the words of Tony Abbott. This idea that we are raiding superannuation. Kieran, what are you talking about?
Well, no, let me put to you the concerns of Joel Fitzgibbon. The proposal is... You can clarify for us then. Clarify for us, is the government considering increasing taxes on super contributions and earnings for those people on high incomes? Yes or no?
Well, we are in the process of preparing a budget, and I'm not going to go...
So you are?
No, Kieran, you can ask me any range of propositions in terms of what may or may not be in the budget. But the minute we start ruling things out, you move on to the next thing. The point is that we are the champions of superannuation. We introduced it. You know, before we came along, in a previous form, in the Hawke and Keating governments, the only people that had access to superannuation were the well-heeled, the wealthy. We extended...
Well, let me read to you. I want to read to you what Pauline Vamos from the Association of Super Funds says. She says, and this is not me with talking points, this is her and her quote, "We are concerned that the current government may make changes to the super system that are about a short-term revenue need rather than long-term retirement incomes policy." That's her, the Super Funds Association. What do you say to concerns from the industry itself?
Well, she shouldn't be concerned because we are approaching all policy areas with a view towards the long-term interests of this country. If that's her concern, she's got nothing to be concerned about. We are getting on with the business of preparing a budget, whether it be in areas such as retirement savings or more broadly. It will be a budget for our nation's future. It'll be a budget that recognises that the days of the money flowing in the way in which it did a decade ago have well and truly passed, that we will need to be a government that has an eye to the future and investing in those areas where it's most significant for future productivity, and that's things like skills, it's education, rolling out the NBN, preparing for the Asian century.
Okay.
These are the things that we'll be doing, and we'll be doing that in a responsible way.
I want to go to Kevin Andrews. Kevin Andrews, on this issue of sustainability of the superannuation system with an ageing population. It's something that Martin Parkinson, the head of Treasury, has discussed. The need to rein in some of the tax concessions when it comes to super contributions and earnings. What do you make of this debate, particularly in the context of the ageing population? Is it something that governments need to look at?
Well, it's interesting that David, as the Assistant Treasurer, has had the opportunity this morning to absolutely rule out any further taxation or increased taxation of superannuation, and he hasn't done that. What's also interesting is the people coming out and saying that Labor shouldn't be touching super are people like Simon Crean, people like Bill Kelty, the people who were there in the Hawke-Keating times who thought that superannuation was a flagship policy of that Hawke-Keating government, but what we see is their fear that this government is walking away once again from the legacy of what Labor put in place in the 1980s and early 1990s. No wonder people are concerned about the direction that Australia's going when you have people who come up to me, say, in their 50s, who have put their kids through school, who've just managed to pay off their mortgage and now want to put away a bit more money over the next 10 or 15 years and say that there are no incentives. In fact, their incentives are being slugged by Labor. These are the people who are concerned about it, and we haven't had a clear answer from David this morning.
Well, I'll go back to David in a moment, Kevin Andrews, but I want to ask you on that issue of sustainability in an ageing population, tax concessions valued at, depending on who you listen to, anywhere between $16 billion and $32 billion annually. Do they need to be looked at?
Well, we have to ensure that people save for the future. Saving is not just money going into the bank, it's money that goes into investment in the future of this country. What we have to go back to in Australia are the 3 Ps which Peter Costello identified in the intergenerational report. We need to grow participation, we need to grow productivity, and we need to look at how our population will continue to grow, because that's a major driver in itself of economic growth in the future. We need a government which is going to look to these things about the next 2 or 3 decades rather than one that's just concerned about the next 2 or 3 weeks and surviving.
All right, well, what do you say to that, David Bradbury, particularly the argument about Simon Crean, Martin Ferguson, Kim Carnow, Joel Fitzgibbon, all worried that this government is going to trash the legacy that you spoke about before in terms of establishing super?
Well, we won't be trashing that legacy. And, you know, Mr Abbott was the one that when super was introduced said it was the biggest con job ever foisted on the Australian people. 2 points to make. Mr Andrews, Mr Abbott, they're out there saying we won't make any changes. That's rubbish. They have already announced that they will rip away tax concessions to the lowest workers, the lowest income workers in this country. They're going to rip concessions away from them. The other thing that Mr Abbott has not confirmed, and he's using weasel words here, but will he confirm that when he says there won't be any adverse changes, that means that he is absolutely committed to increasing the superannuation guarantee from 9 to 12%. That's what we are doing for Australians. That means for a 30-year-old Australian, across their working life, we will deliver an extra $100,000 in retirement savings. Now, this was a previous plan that Labor had. When Howard came in, he stopped it dead in its tracks. Mr Abbott has not said that he will allow that 9% to go all the way up to 12%. It's about time he gave a guarantee on that. He's using weasel words.
Joe Hockey said that they back it. They won't reverse that. That's what they've been very clear.
No, they won't reverse it. So if it's not up to 12%, will they cut it dead in its tracks, or will they allow it to increase all the way to 12%?
But I suppose people want certainty from the government as well. That's the issue here. About super, you know, David Bradbury, that certainty and constant changes around people's retirement, that's a big issue. It creates a lot of angst and anxiety within the working population if you're changing these retirement setups. Do you concede that certainty is important here?
We will be providing certainty in a range of policy areas when we hand down the budget. Now, the point here is that we are being asked questions about speculation upon speculation upon speculation. There should be questions being asked of Mr Abbott about his plan to actually rip money away from our lowest income workers. And on top of that, simple proposition, and you're even missing the subtlety here yourself, Kieran. They are saying they won't reverse any changes. Are they committed to increasing compulsory superannuation all the way from 9 to 12%?
Well, OK, let's go to Kevin Andrews, because I don't think there was much uncertainty in the statement that I read from Joe Hockey, which said that they're going to not unwind that 9 to 12% increase. But, Kevin Andrews, your response to that, and also I'll give you the opportunity to respond to the criticism levelled there by David Bradbury when it comes to the low income tax offset for super contributions as well.
Well, what Joe Hockey said is on the record, so I don't think there's any doubt about that.
No, be clear about it. Don't use weasel words, Kevin. Are you absolutely committed to going all the way to 12%? Put it on the record.
That Joe Hockey's made this absolutely clear, David. But let's
weasel
get back
words.
to your other
Weasel
argument.
words, Kevin. Put it on the record. Will you go all the way to 12% or not? Simple question.
Listen. For a bloke who was ducking questions about super a moment ago, I don't think you're in any good
Simple
position
question.
to actually
Yes or
talk
no?
about this. But let me get to the substance of this. The reality
you won't
is
rule
that,
it out.
Yeah, you were talking about the certainty of budget. Well, I tell you what, for the last 5 years, if there was a prize for a political category of fiction in Australia, then Wayne Swan's budget would be the winner each year. I mean, this is a budget that's hardly stacked up for a week or two after it's been brought down. There is no certainty, and that's what the people of Australia are concerned about. You're in government. You can't give us any guarantees this morning, and yet you're asking us about something which we know will probably be a work of fiction again this year.
About a policy you've already announced. You've already announced this policy. Let's be clear on what it means. Are you going to give a guarantee that you will go all the way from 9 to 12%, or will you do what Howard did and come in and cut it dead in its tracks at whatever rate it's at? So if it's 9.25%, 9.5%, are you going to cut it there, or are you going to give a commitment to go all the way to 12%?
Kevin Andrews, your response just quickly. Yeah.
David, let's get a guarantee that you're going to deliver a surplus this year.
So you won't do it.
No,
you're leaving it open.
You can't give us the bottom line of what the books will be. Everybody knows that it's probably going to be a puff piece anyway, a piece of fiction so far as the finances of Australia are concerned. What Joe Hockey said is clear, but the reality is that you blokes are leaving this country in a total... You are leaving this country in a total mess. David, you should be having a look at what you're doing yourself. You're the assistant treasurer and you can't answer these questions.
If it's that clear,
we've got to go to a break. David, we're taking a break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. This is AM Agenda. Thanks for your company. With me now, Kevin Andrews and David Bradbury, continuing our discussion. Now onto the issue of asylum seeker boats. The Coalition last night issued a statement, David Bradbury, relating to the 600th boat to arrive since the Labor government changed the border protection policy back in August of 2008. It's an indictment on the government, isn't it?
Well, look, is anyone surprised? They're now issuing press releases to welcome the arrival of boats when they've had the opportunity to support our plan in terms of the Malaysian arrangement. It's now been out there for them to support for a couple of years. And frankly, we've had our expert panel that handed down their recommendations. We've sought to implement all of those recommendations. The one significant one that still remains outstanding is to put in place the Malaysian arrangement. We continue to have from the opposition a view that they want to stop the boats. They just don't want to vote for policies that will actually achieve that.
But the policy, do you really believe that that policy would work now, given that the 800 genuine refugees that Labor would send to Malaysia, would that be swamped by the number arriving in a couple of days at the moment, or a week?
Well, look, I believe that all of the measures that were recommended by the expert panel should be implemented. And frankly, on what possible basis is the Coalition, with such a determined position of stopping the boats, standing in the way of this particular policy proposal?
But there's a massive question mark as to whether it would work now, given the number of arrivals, and you've got people in the community unable to work, living, not even able to earn a living, released in the community. It's a debacle, isn't it?
Well, if people are so confident it's not going to work, give it a go.
All right,
give it a
Kevin
go.
Andrews, what do you say to that? And also, I want to put to you that the Coalition has talked up a big game here, and if you do win, as many expect you will in September, it's not going to be as easy as you've said it is to stop the boats, is it?
Well, let's go back to the Malaysia solution. David talks about 800 people being swapped. We've had 600 boats. At this rate, we'll have 800 boats, let alone 800 people. 35,000 people, 600 boats coming here at a rate at 2 to 3 times what they were even a year or so ago. I mean, 800 is just a drop in the ocean. Anybody who looks at this knows that that is not a solution. This needs a total solution. Things like we've said about working in conjunction with other countries, about putting back in place proper temporary protection visas and a suite of measures that would do it. I mean, the last couple of days we had one of the leading people smugglers in Asia come out and say that John Howard's policy was right. He would know because it was his trade that John Howard's policy stopped. We can stop the boats, but we're not going to do it by these Mickey Mouse measures from the Labor Party. Yes, it's going to be a big problem, a big challenge for us in the future, but only by having resolute policies such as we've announced will we be able to turn this around.
But Kevin Andrews, my question is it going to be done in the... Do you believe it's going to be done in the short term, or is this going to be something that would take a term of office to do?
This is about putting the policies in place and sending an absolutely unambiguous, clear message to the people smugglers that their trade is over. Now, we did that in the past. When I was the Immigration Minister, the last Immigration Minister in the Howard government, we had just a trickle of people coming to Australia because we'd had proper policies in place.
All right.
We can do that again, and we will.
Gentlemen, we've got to go. Kevin Andrews, David Bradbury, appreciate your time. A robust discussion. Have a good Easter.
You too.
You too.
That's all for AM Agenda. The news is next.